Good morning. Stephanie here from UMAMI Crave the Fifth. Last week, I decided that I would try to make a roasted butternut squash soup. And normally I leave that to Joanna because hers always tastes better. But she wasn't in town and I was desperate for some soup. So I decided that I would make it myself. It was so easy and it turned out so well that I really wanted to share it with you. So I have in front of me the ingredients that you need to make the UMAMI Curried Maple Butternut Squash Soup. I've got a good sized butternut squash, a couple ribs of celery, an onion. I'm going to chop these up. I've got a couple cloves of garlic. It's optional, but I'm just going to saute this with the celery and the onion. And then I've got some vegetable stock, a can of coconut milk, and the real secret weapon in this recipe, the UMAMI Curried Maple Dressing dip and finishing sauce. A little salt and pepper here to season things with, and you've got yourself a soup. So the first thing I did was to cut the butternut squash in half. I didn't do it very evenly, but it is in half. I scooped out the seeds and the pulp, and then all I did was drizzle some curried maple kind of in the bowl and spread it around on the top. I probably used a couple tablespoons on each side, maybe. I'm gonna put a little salt and pepper, and then I'm gonna put it in the oven at 375 for about 45 minutes or so. I'll check it and see if it's done, and if it is, I'll show you the next step. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my onion, my celery that I've cut up in fairly big chunks, and a couple cloves of garlic, put them in a pan here with some olive oil and a little salt and pepper, and then I'm going to saute them just until they're softened. So I've had the vegetables here on the stove in the olive oil for about 15 minutes, and you can see they're starting to caramelize a little. So now what I'm going to do is add a couple of cups of vegetable broth. Now I always use better than bouillon just because I really like the flavor, and I use a heaping tablespoon for each cup of liquid that I'm going to use. So I'm going to pour this in here. Didn't quite get it all dissolved. And then I'm going to boil that just to soften the vegetables a little bit more, and then when that's done, I'll turn it off and wait for the squash to finish. So our squash is done. It's been in the oven about 45 minutes, and depending on your oven, just basically you want it so that a fork goes in it very easily, and that you can almost mash it with a fork. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna let it cool a little bit because it's hot. Then I'll scoop everything, kind of mash it in together, and then I'll add it to the vegetables. So I've got my onions, garlic, and celery that are all sauteed and soaking in the vegetable broth that I cooked them in for about 10 minutes just to make sure they were soft. And here I have the squash. I just scraped it basically out of the skin. It wasn't difficult, nor was it very pretty, so that's why you're seeing it here. So I'm going to add all this squash to the other vegetables, and I'm just gonna stir it up and let it kind of blend a little bit, and then we'll add the coconut milk. So I've got the squash heating with the celery, the onion, the garlic, and the vegetable stock, and you can see it's coming together. It's quite kind of like a paste. So now I'm going to add a can of pure coconut milk. I used to use the low-fat stuff, but Joanna said this was better, and you know what, she's right. But if you want to use the low-fat one, you certainly can. So I'm just going to incorporate that in there and let that heat up again, and then we'll use the immersion blender, and we ought to have a soup. So look who showed up when it was just the time to finish the soup. Joanna's here and she's added a little more coconut milk to the soup mixture. And you can adjust based on what consistency your soup is. I had a pretty big butternut squash. So with the 2 cups of vegetable broth and the 1 can of coconut milk, it probably would have been sufficient with a smaller squash, but Joanna we had some coconut milk left over from a different recipe, so she's just adding it here, and she's added some salt and pepper, and she's just heating it up.
It's good, I tasted it, it's very good. Nice and creamy. Okay, here's our final product. UMAMI roasted butternut squash and curried maple soup. It smells so good. The texture is so creamy. And I'm gonna garnish it with just a little drizzle of curried maple and top it with some toasted pumpkin seeds. So good. It's good. It's really good.